There is a trap that most people will never see, even as it holds them in place for decades. It has nothing to do with income, nothing to do with knowledge or discipline or intelligence, and it affects people earning $50,000 a year and people earning $500,000 a year almost equally. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what this trap is, why your brain is specifically designed to fall into it, and the Stoic reframe that makes it possible to escape permanently. But first, you need to understand why you have been misreading your own spending your entire life. Let's start with a number. The average American household earning $100,000 a year has less than 3 months of savings. Not 3 months of income, 3 months of basic expenses. Meanwhile, Thomas Stanley spent 20 years studying American millionaires for his book, The Millionaire Next Door, and found that the majority drive domestic cars, live in the same house for 20 or more years, and spend less on clothes, watches, and vacations than their neighbors who earn a fraction of their net worth. The gap between these two groups is not income, it is not intelligence, it is one behavioral difference. One group buys things to feel wealthy. The other group buys assets that produce wealth. This sounds simple. It is simple. But simple is not the same as easy. Because the purchase that makes you feel wealthy is not a rational decision. It is an emotional one, and the emotion it satisfies is more powerful than most people realize. Every dollar you spend signaling prosperity is a dollar not compounding, and it costs you twice. Once when you spend it, and again every year it sits as a depreciating asset instead of a growing one. A $50,000 car purchase at 30 years old does not cost you $50,000. It cost you the $400,000 that money would have become by retirement at a 10% average annual return. The car is the visible cost. The compounding loss is the invisible one. And nobody advertises the invisible cost. To understand why people keep making this decision, even when they intellectually know better, you need to understand two concepts from behavioral economics and Stoic philosophy that turn out to be describing the exact same thing. The first is hedonic adaptation. Your brain normalizes whatever you have. A purchase that produces a strong positive emotion at the point of acquisition produces almost no emotional response 18 months later. It is just background. So to maintain the feeling, the next purchase needs to be bigger, newer, or more exclusive. This is not a flaw, it is a feature. Your brain was designed to adapt so you could keep seeking and improving, but in a modern consumer economy, it is turned against you. The Stoics identified this 2,000 years ago without knowing the neuroscience. Seneca wrote that the person who says, "I will be happy," when never arrives at happiness, because the moment they achieve what they wanted, they have already moved the target. What Seneca described as the poverty of desires is exactly what behavioral economists now call the hedonic treadmill. The second concept is identity economics. Research in behavioral finance shows that the most powerful driver of spending is not desire for the object. It is desire for the identity the object signals. You do not want the car. You want to be the kind of person who drives that car. You do not want the watch. You want the social position the watch communicates. This is not vanity. It is a very old survival mechanism. For most of human history, your social position determined your access to food, protection, and resources. Status mattered in ways that were literally life and death. Your brain has not updated for a world where signaling status can quietly destroy your financial future across decades. The Stoics were uniquely positioned to understand this trap because they thought carefully about the relationship between internal states and external goods in a way that most philosophy, and essentially all modern financial advice, ignores. Marcus Aurelius made a distinction worth holding on to. He separated things into two categories: things within our control and things outside our control. What you own is outside your control. What you want is, with practice, inside it. This is not an argument for poverty. The Stoics were not ascetics. Seneca was one of the wealthiest people in Rome. Marcus Aurelius was emperor. They were not rejecting wealth. They were rejecting need. The Stoic position is that wealth is fine to have and dangerous to need. The moment you need the signal, you are owned by it. Epictetus, who was himself a former slave, put this with characteristic precision. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. What he was describing is not a moral position, it is a financial strategy. When you reduce what you need, the surplus accumulates automatically. When you accumulate the surplus, you gain what the Stoics called freedom, the ability to make decisions based on reason rather than compulsion. The person performing wealth is compelled. Every paycheck has destinations before it arrives. The car payment, the mortgage on the bigger house, the subscription to the right gym in the right neighborhood. They are not choosing to spend. They are maintaining a performance that has taken on its own momentum. This is what Epictetus meant when he called dependence on external goods a form of slavery. So how do you break the cycle? Not through willpower, not through budgets. Those are tools that address the behavior without addressing the cause. The Stoic answer, and the answer that behavioral research consistently supports, is identity. You have to decide who you are before you decide what to buy. If your identity is built on visible markers, the car, the address, the brand, every purchase decision runs through the filter of, does this maintain the image? And maintaining the image is expensive. If your identity is built on something internal, a financial position, a set of values, a long-term goal, the filter changes completely. The question becomes, does this serve the person I have decided to be? This is practical. Before any significant purchase, ask this: am I buying this to have it or to show it? That question cuts through almost everything. Not because showing things is immoral, but because showing things is expensive, and you should at minimum make that decision consciously, rather than letting social pressure make it for you. The wealthy people in Thomas Stanley's research had one thing in common beyond the financial habits. They had decided what they were building toward, not what they wanted to appear to be building, what they were actually building. And every spending decision was evaluated against that. Here is something worth understanding about the world you live in. The modern economy is not designed to make you wealthy. It is designed to make you feel wealthy just long enough to hand over money for the next thing. Luxury brands do not sell products. They sell the feeling of arriving. Every advertisement for a premium car, a designer watch, or a business class upgrade is selling you a mirror image of a person you want to become. The product is not the point. The identity signal is. And they are extraordinarily good at this because they have spent billions of dollars studying exactly which emotional buttons to press and in what sequence. Social media has amplified this by several orders of magnitude. Your grandparents compared themselves to their neighbors. You compare yourself to a curated highlight reel of thousands of people, many of whom are performing a wealth they do not have. Research on social comparison shows that the more time people spend on social platforms, the higher their reference point for what constitutes a normal standard of living becomes. And a higher reference point means more spending to keep up with an image that was never real to begin with. The philosopher Thorstein Veblen wrote about conspicuous consumption in 1899, before television, before the internet, before Instagram. He noticed that in industrialized societies, people increasingly bought things not for their utility, but for their visibility, to signal membership in a class they aspired to. He called it waste, technically speaking, not a moral judgment, a description of the economic function. What Veblen could not have predicted is how the cost of performing status would scale when the audience became unlimited. Your neighbors can now be anyone in the world, and the competition to signal upward has no ceiling because there is always someone further up to compare against. This is the machine you are running on. Understanding that it exists is the first condition of getting off it. Let's make the cost of performance concrete, because the abstract argument about compounding is easy to dismiss. The specific number is not. The average American household spends approximately $1,500 a month on what researchers classify as status-driven consumption. Car payments on vehicles they could not afford to own outright, restaurant meals chosen for their social setting rather than the food, clothing from brands whose primary value is the logo, home renovations driven by what the neighborhood expects rather than what the family needs. $1,500 a month is $18,000 a year. $18,000 invested annually at a 10% average annual return, which is roughly the long-run average of the US stock market, becomes $3.2 million over 30 years. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between financial independence and financial dependence at retirement. Every dollar of that gap was spent not on things, but on the feeling of things. The Stoics had a practice called voluntary discomfort. Seneca would periodically eat simple food, wear plain clothes, and sleep without luxury. Not because he could not afford otherwise, because he wanted to prove to himself that he did not need it. He wrote that after a few days of this, he would realize that the things he feared losing were never as necessary as he had imagined, and then he would return to his normal life with a calibrated relationship to what he owned. He owned it. It did not own him. You do not have to practice voluntary poverty. You have to practice voluntary accuracy. An accurate accounting of what your status spending actually costs you across time, not in the moment of purchase, is often enough to change the decision. The purchase feels like $100. The real cost is $20,000. The math, once seen clearly, is hard to unsee. There is a feeling on the other side of this that most people have never experienced because they have never stayed on the path long enough to encounter it. The Stoics called it autarkeia, self-sufficiency, the condition of not needing external things to maintain your internal state. In practical terms, it shows up in specific moments. It is the moment when you can walk away from a job that pays well but costs you something important, because you have built enough runway that the money no longer owns the decision. It is the moment when a market correction happens and you feel something closer to calm than panic, because you know what you own and why you own it, and your identity is not attached to the number. It is the moment when someone else's car or house or title genuinely stops mattering to you, not because you have suppressed the comparison, but because you have replaced the metric. This is what the Stoics were actually pointing at when they wrote about wealth, not the absence of money, not the renunciation of comfort, the absence of compulsion, the ability to make decisions from a position of stability rather than anxiety. That feeling is what you are actually buying when you invest the gap, not a portfolio number, a different relationship with your own life. Epictetus, the former slave, understood this better than almost anyone who ever wrote about freedom. He had no external freedom for much of his life. What he had, and what he taught, was this: the person who controls their own desires controls everything that matters. The person who cannot control their desires is a slave regardless of what they own. The trap is real, the psychology is real, and the solution is not to stop enjoying your money. It is to make sure the money you enjoy is actually serving you rather than an audience that is, mostly, not paying attention. Stop buying things to feel rich. Buy things because they serve a life you have consciously chosen. and build the rest. The Stoics would say that wealth is not a number. It is a relationship with desire. When you need less than you have, you are wealthy, regardless of what your account shows. When you need more than you have, you are poor, regardless of your income. If this changed how you think about spending, subscribe to Discipline Well. We publish Stoic finance content every week. And watch this video next.